Okay. Well, I was so honored and happy to be asked to be the speaker tonight. And happy Pride, everybody. Happy Pride Month. So that is very nice. Um, I am going to share with you a project that I've been working on for a few years, which is I'm trying to bring it together so that I can probably self-publish another children's book. I don't know if everyone knows, probably everyone knows that I wrote a children's book a couple of years ago, which is available on Amazon, called Love Remains, and it features a family at their grandparents' Rosh Hashanah dinner table over several years. And it shows the transition of a Jewish transgender boy in the family. So thank you. So I wrote that book and it was just a lot of fun. And I don't really know how to write children's books, but I had this idea for this story in my head and I consulted a million different people and we played with it. And Emily Mace actually from Macomb edited it. And this really neat friend who is a queer Jewish tattoo artist did the illustrations, and it was just a lot of fun to do it. And so I did that project. And after that, I had this other idea for this book that I'm going to tell you about tonight. So I'm going to share my screen and show you what I've been thinking about. Okay, so okay. Okay, can everyone see this? Okay, so here's my question to all of you. And if you have paper and you want to jot it down, but I'd like to go around and have everyone kind of answer this question. It's a really, really big question, so you don't have to answer the whole thing. But what comes to your mind when you hear this major, major Jewish idea that we are made in God's image? B'Tselem Elohim. We are made in the image of God, which is from Genesis, from the creation story. And I feel like we use that phrase so often, that we are made in God's image, and it's a phrase that's now come to be a phrase of inclusion. Like we use that for inclusion work. We definitely use that around pride and about respect for all people and love of all people. But what does it mean to be made in God's image? Because of course, God has no image. So it doesn't mean we look like God. I think we all can probably agree on that. But so what does that mean to you? So let's just quickly, if we can just real quickly go around, you can just say pass if you don't have anything, but kind of think of what that means to you. And if anyone wants to say a sentence, Vanessa, what's the best way to do this? Call on people or let people just chime in with a few different people who want to say something?
Sure. I mean, I'm always, favor raising your hand.
Okay. Vanessa
I'm
will
old-
call on
I'm
you.
I'm old school on that way. You
Okay,
can
raise your hand, raise a virtual hand.
Right. And I see Susan Wallach. There you go.
Okay.
Oh,
What does
okay.
it mean to be made in
Well,
God's image?
so I agree with you about the fact that God has no image, but you kind of answered the question that I answered it the way I would have said, that to me, it means just respect for people and having respect for whatever a person says they are, or what they want to be, and just not chastising anybody for their beliefs. As long as you're not hurting anyone else, why should we care how other people behave or what they do, as long as they aren't hurting anyone? So that's kind of what I think of when I think about God's image.
That's
And so
great.
the reason we honor all people is because we have something of God within us. And so we're honoring God by honoring other people.
Right.
Anyone want to build on that, or have I?
Amy Plotnick, then Susan. Oh, wait a minute.
That's me.
There you go. I got you.
Thank you. So when you ask the question, of course, if you answer it as well, and Susan answered it, but the first thing that came to me is that what does it mean to be in God's image? It just means that everything that God represents, everything that we've been taught in our life through Torah, through values, through how to treat one another, how to love ourselves, love each other, all of those qualities is just what I think of when I said, what does it mean to be made in God's image? It's all that we aspire to be.
Wow. It's
Okay,
all encompassing.
Susie Mason, then Alice.
I was just thinking kind of similarly that it's not a physical image, that it's more of what's inside of us, which is similar to what's been said, but that's where we can be like God or have God be like us.
Our soul, our spirit, our energy, that what you can't see, but what you feel from other people.
Mhm. I will mute.
Alice.
Yeah, this is building on what you said, Rabbi, and also what Susan said. For me, I always, whenever I hear that, like in services or reading something, it always brings to mind that every single person is made in God's image. So God's image is like all inclusive. It's everything we can imagine, and maybe things that we can't imagine. It's so much above what any individual is. It's just more than that.
Holly, did you?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that it distinguishes us from each other, but it also unifies us by looking at the different aspects of who we are. And gives us our sense of self in relation to others as well, that we were all created, we're all equal. We were all created in the same way.
Love that. That's so beautiful. So think about all of those things. We are going, all of those things you said. And if you have paper and you just want to write down, words that came up that you just heard, because I think a lot of us touched on similar ideas. I'm going to share with you a podcast that touches on this idea as well. And the podcast is from Judaism Unbound. And I don't know if you listen to that podcast or you know about that podcast, but I really enjoy it. It's hosted by a local Jewish educator named Dan Liebenson. And there are hundreds of episodes now, but this one episode features a poet, a writer named Joy Ladin. And put her name in the chat. And do you know this name, Joy Ladin? Is this familiar to you? I'm just making sure I'm spelling her last name right, actually.
I just brought up what I'm going to play.
So let me just give you background on Joy Ladin. She was a professor at Yeshiva University, which is an Orthodox seminary in New York. And she transitioned to be, the woman that she is, and was essentially fired from Yeshiva University. This was many years ago. And I believe either she went to sue or there was a situation where she, confronted the university, and then they said, oh, no, you weren't fired. You're on a writing leave. And
not getting paid.
she was getting paid, but but she did transition, and she ended up staying actually as a professor at Yeshiva University.
Wow.
And she has books out, and she writes poetry, and she's the feature of this podcast. It's really interesting, actually. It's kind of serendipitous that we're speaking about this tonight, because I just saw on Facebook that Yeshiva University just allowed their pride club to start at the university. And so it's just a really, history making, I think, really for the university. But the part of the podcast that we're going to play is Joy talking about what it means to be made in God's image. And basically Joy Layden looks at Torah from a transgender point of view. She looks at God from a transgender point of view. And you'll kind of, as you hear her, you'll hear I'll play a few minutes of it and then we can talk about it.
And I'll put the, I'll put the link in the chat when we're done here.
That really struck me was in the Soul of the Stranger, when you're talking about God, and you talk about how in Jewish tradition we're very comfortable with the idea that, yes, of course, God is not a physical being like we usually are, but nevertheless we'll use gendered language to talk about God, and we'll have various metaphors and images of God that are human, and we understand that we have to do that because we are human and it's the only way that we can access God. And you sort of present that as a version of what's been happening to trans people throughout history, and that in some ways we're doing a terrible injustice to God by not allowing God to be who God is. And you talk about how it's actually not fair of humans to not accept God's own understanding of God's self. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about how you think your experience and your perspective really does for you shape an understanding of God that's deeper than perhaps is available to many others, and then how you sort of try to translate that for those of us who haven't had the experiences that you've had.
So like many trans people, my hunch is most trans people, but I've never done a survey, but I think it's a common thing for trans people to say, wow, the people that I love and am relating to can't really understand me, because the culture, the language, the categories that we have available for ways of understanding people, the roles that are based on gender and assumptions about it, they just don't work for someone like me. I think it does feel unfair. Why isn't society set up to understand me? I think, that would be lovely if cultures were in fact individually tailored to the needs of individual people. As a trans person, I felt peculiarly poorly served by my culture, and that I was always having to choose between being in relation to people and being who I was, which would render me incomprehensible. So those were in tension with each other. And it was constant trade-offs. For God, those trade-offs are absolute. So it sucks that we can't understand God in God's own terms, but that is the definition of being human. That's where Maimonides comes into the book, because Maimonides thinks in an incredibly sustained way about what it means to have a being at the center of your tradition, of your religion, of your life, that anytime you try to understand that being in any way, you have done a terrible injustice to God. So Maimonides, I think, pushes that as far as it can go. And so one of the things that I realized when I was writing this book was that the way I was this common denominator way of defining transgender, I didn't want to just talk about being a transsexual of my generation. I wanted to male to female. So I thought, okay, it has to be like anybody who's something more complex that everybody can recognize parts of themselves that don't fit into the cultural categories that are available. And then I realized, well, actually, if you believe, as I do, and this is weird because I don't know what this means when it says God creates human beings in God's own image. I have no idea what that means. That is a Jewish koan, as far as I'm concerned. You take a being that has no image and say you're created in that image. Like, that is the sound of one hand clapping Jewishly. So, but I nonetheless believe that this is true. So there must be some part of human beings, despite how different we are from God, there must be some part of us that is really like God. And I don't believe it's human reason. Human reason has been taken down many pegs thanks to things like the Holocaust and corporate efficiency and monstrous uses of reason. So as I was working on this, I thought, oh, the part of us that must be akin to God must be the part that, like God, doesn't fit into human categories. We have that incomprehensibility, which is why nobody is going to seamlessly fit inside human categories. And that means that at a root level, every human being has this incomprehensible vastness. Trans people and other people who are queer are forced to recognize that because the categories fit us so badly. So for me to identify as trans is saying there's a huge part of me that doesn't
I
fit
think we
into
can
these
stop, Vanessa.
categories. And it's so big, I gotta wreck
right.
my life and relationships.
So
I just saw that she was talking about being a Nazir, which was in last week's Torah.
yeah,
course.
it's an amazing the whole podcast is so interesting. So if you want to go back and listen to the whole thing, but I think that's enough for us to kind of, hopefully that's enough to
you were
really feel
interviewed on
about.
the podcast too, Ari. Don't forget to toot your own horn. You were on the podcast.
Okay. So what do you make of this? So basically what Joy is arguing is that, God repeatedly kind of says who God is, and we basically continuously misgender God, right? We put on human labels. God at some point says, that God is, I will be who I will be, but we use words and we use this limiting language for God. So I guess part of it is like, what do you think about that? And then I think the second part is this idea that for Joy, the parts of humanity that are the most messy or the most fluid or the most incomprehensible to ourselves, to other people about us, must be the parts of us made in God's image. So think on these two things and tell me what you think of these things. What do you think about the fact that we kind of continuously misgender God, put God in categories that God doesn't exist in? And then the second part is, what do you think about this idea that the parts of us that are incomprehensible, that are confusing, that are, hard to understand, that are hard to explain about us, that must be the parts of us that are like God? So what do you think of both of these ideas?
I think as we try to put God into curriculum for our younger students, you go with the more concrete. You try to get them off of God as a man sitting on a throne with a white beard. And you have to get the teachers off of that too. But that's, right, as we say, that's a different story. And so this concept is very high functioning, and I'd love to see what high school students could do with it.
Yeah. Okay, so think on all of this, and as you want to talk or have ideas, chime in. But when I heard this, I just went wild. This was just super eye-opening for me. And I really, as soon as I heard this podcast, this idea occurred to me, and I'm going to share my screen and show this to you. So this is one of Joy's quotes from this project that she was working on. And her quote is, "The only thing we know about God is that God doesn't fit in human categories." And so the only thing we know about being created in God's image is that we have not been created to fit in human categories. So I love this idea so much, because of course we create, social constructs, communal constructs to exist. So we've created this idea, we've created gender, female and male, and we even have colors that, fit with each, and clothing that fits with each, and hair, which is, of course, it changes with each generation. It changes over time. But this idea that if you strip that all away, human beings are not made to have to fit into a box. we at our core, just like God, are probably on a spectrum somewhere, fluid, right? Like, and that's where that whole idea comes from. So I listened to the podcast, I read this quote, and I realized that Judaism actually could be a model for coming out of boxes. And so I started really thinking about boxes, all the boxes we get put in. And so, you know, if you have paper and you want to jot down, like, and you just think about all of the boxes that society puts you in, or your parents put you in, or other people put you in, and just all the boxes we have to check off for everything we do, you know, gendered boxes and racial boxes. But you know, the roles we have, the hats we wear. I started thinking about the image of kids playing in boxes, and we all know, you know, how the toy kind of gets put aside and the box is really the fun thing. And kids love playing with boxes, in boxes. The box can become a boat, the box can become a spaceship, you know, and kids, any of us who have, you know, taught kids or, you know, played with kids have seen this, that how, and there's even a book series, like, have you seen this? It's, you know, it's not a box, it's or it's not a stick. That's another one, but it's a great book series. So we like to play in boxes maybe, but I don't think human beings love to be put in boxes. And it's when we can kind of come out of the box that interesting things can happen. And so I started thinking about Judaism and all of the boxes in Judaism, or all the vessels in Judaism. And vessel is actually a very holy word in Judaism, because it, when we think about like tikkun olam, really, we have this idea that there are, you know, an infinite number of vessels of God's light that's shattered everywhere, and they're just scattered everywhere. And when we do tikkun olam, when we do mitzvot, we free the sparks back up to God. But there's also an idea in Judaism that we are clay kodesh. We are holy vessels, each of ourselves. And so really Judaism loves to play with this idea of boxes or vessels or containers. And so for this project that I'm kind of working on now, I picked 5 of them. And so I'll kind of talk through them, and then I'll be really interested to hear what you all think about these ideas. So a Kiddush cup. Rabbi Ike loves, you know, has this amazing Kiddush cup collection, and it's such a cool thing when you walk into Macomb to see all of the different Kiddush cup designs and all of it. But you know the saying, my cup runneth over. So literally on Shabbat, you literally must overflow your cup. It has to spill over. That is the tradition. And so, like, you know, I just took one picture, which we've all seen, of, you know, this is Havdalah. You literally spill out the cup and dip in the thing. On Shabbat, if you've ever been to a more traditional home, someone will pour the water until it, has anyone seen this? Where it actually spills over. And you think like you are wasting all your wine or something. Like, why are you doing that? But it's because of this idea, my cup runneth over. And so built within this Kiddush cup idea is this idea of spilling over or running over. And then I thought about a tzedakah box. I mean, you know, there are how many gazillions of different designs of tzedakah boxes. We have beautiful, beautiful boxes. But a tzedakah box is a vessel. It's a container for money, but it doesn't do any good just on a shelf. It must spill out. It has to be taken out in order to do the thing of, you know, in order to do the mitzvah of whatever we're doing, feeding the hungry, you know, buying supplies. So the box, hello, hi, I'm on, okay. The people in my house here. So the box is the container for tzedakah, you know, in the case of tzedakah, but we have to take it out of the box. It has to spill out. It has to come out in order to do the mitzvah. Then I was thinking the etrog box. Now, have you all seen an etrog box? I mean, okay, I've got to, hold on. I got to Google one and show you these. I mean, this is a really weird thing here. But hold on, I'm going to show you. Let me share my screen. Okay. So, on the holiday of Sukkot, we have, we buy a $80 lemon-like fruit because, the etrog, and just don't touch the stem. You don't touch the stem. The etrog becomes unkosher, not kosher, if the pitome comes off. So you just have to be very careful with this very precious fruit of a goodly tree. So we make beautiful, beautiful, ornate boxes for the etrog, if you can believe it. We make boxes for a fruit. Boxes like these boxes. Oh, these are, famous designed etrog boxes, these kind of egg ones. These beautiful cedar one. I mean, you can just scroll through. I mean, there are just gorgeous, gorgeous, ornate etrog boxes. But that's the vessel, that's the vehicle for, holding the etrog safe and secure, but it has to come out of the box in order to do the mitzvah. Okay. Then I was thinking Havdalah spice box. Think about that one. I'm telling you, we love these. We love these containers. Let's look. So the ones that look like a castle. I mean, there are just such gorgeous Havdalah spice boxes or containers for the cloves or the cinnamon or whatever you're putting in. But again, it doesn't do any good to sit on the table. You have to shake it. It has to come out of the container in order to have Havdalah to smell it. And then the last one I was thinking about, and you might be able to even brainstorm more containers in Judaism, but the last one I was thinking about is the Mishkan, or the tabernacle, the traveling ark. Because in Torah, the famous saying is, build me a sanctuary, build me the Mishkan that I may dwell among you. So, right, it should say, build me an ark because I'm going to dwell in it. But no, God cannot be contained in the box. God dwells among us. God spills over. And so that really has gotten me really thinking creatively about this. And I got super excited about all of this. And so I have a draft for this book that I'll put out soon, called 5 Jewish Scenes of Spilling Over. And so for each one, I kind of made up a little scene explaining how the thing spills over. And basically what I'm trying to say is that in all of these cases, the thing has to come out of the box in order to be used. And it's really in the coming out of ourselves, in the coming out of the boxes, that we come closest to God. So what do you think? You get this idea? Do you agree? Okay, so just Vanessa, you want to call on?
Yeah, we have Alice and then Susie, and then
Okay.
and then it's Andy or Rich. I'm not sure who it is.
Okay.
Right.
Wait,
Alice.
I'm gonna pass for now.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Susie. Oh, wait. There you go. Whoops.
I just was thinking how interesting it is because we all have so many different roles that kind of define us to different people, whether you're your kid's mom or your dog's mom or your husband's wife or Dolly or the teacher or whatever it is. There's so many specific categories that you fit in, and it's hard to see the whole person. The whole person is never visible. We never overflow from that. Everyone sees us in our own little box, but I think it's such an interesting idea that we're most like God when we overflow that box. Cool.
Thank you, Susie. Andy and or Rich.
Yeah, no, it's
Take a
me.
guess, Vanessa.
It's me. It seems to me, I've never thought about this, but that the paragon of this would be a book. And, we're the people of the book. And what is a book if it's just on a shelf, closed? I mean,
Right.
it really does need to be opened and spill over and whatever. Otherwise, so that's my thought.
I really like that. And you could also apply that to the Torah. If you don't open up the scroll, what's happening? Susan Wallach.
Okay, so Ari, when you said this is to help us come out of ourselves, it reminded me of a book that I just started reading called Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. And it's written by a man named Adam Grant. And it was recommended to me by both of my daughters. And because at my age, I've had to do a lot of changing in my attitudes, because when I grew up, we were all put in boxes. There's no, and as I have grown and learned, I've had to change my attitudes about things. And this book is wonderful. I would highly recommend it to people to get you to think again. Don't stay stuck where you've been for so many years. You need to come out of yourself. And so when you said that, it reminded me of this.
Okay. I have Amy Plotnick, then Holly.
So I've never heard this. It's such a fascinating concept, because the visual I have is how constrained we are when we're so afraid.
Yeah.
When we live our life in fear and afraid to come out of the box, when we are afraid we don't take risks, then we can't grow. And then we're stuck in this, stale belief system that we can never be more than who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think it's fascinating.
Yes. I mean, that's so well said. And so when we dare to, to experiment with dress or experiment with hair or voice or attitude or your walk or your activity, or anything that gets you out of yourself, that idea that brings us closest to God is just so powerful and affirming to me.
And it also gives permission too,
Right.
because there's light in that.
Right.
Holly.
I was just going to say that, we are in boxes, right? And we could look at our outside and we can look at each other, but we don't really, until we spill over and trust each other, we don't know who we are. And so we need to do that every day. We're no good sitting and not speaking and not being who we are either. And I'm a huge Adam Grant fan. I'm a groupie. So thanks, Sue.
That's, yeah. No, I absolutely love that idea. One of my favorite Hebrew words is the word Erev, evening. And it's also the word the Eruv, which is this line, it's a wire that's put in on utility poles to designate an area where observant, someone who's practicing Shabbat in a certain way can carry within the Eruv, because it's an extension of the home. And so it extends private space where you're allowed to carry something. So you can carry your car keys, you can carry whatever you need. So, Highland Park has an Eruv, and there are Eruvs around the world as well. But Erev, Eruv, and then Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeb Bazet, all Israel's responsible one for the other, that Aravim, that responsible. And it's what Holly just said. It's all, these words are about the blurring. Erev is the blurring of day to night. When exactly does evening begin? The Eruv is the blurring of private space and public space. And then Aravim, responsible is the blurring of actually humanity. It's what Holly says. Where do I stop and you start? Where, and rubbing off on each other. And so I really think that's a powerful thing, Holly. is in the getting to know each other, in the way of seeing each other's humanity and then being changed by the other person. And that's what I always think about in community when we say like, join us, or because I always feel like in order to be truly welcoming, we change because you're here. You have to have an impact. We have, now that all of our voices are here, there's something that's changed, we all change because we hear each other and we know each other. So I think that's really powerful.
Rabbi Ike.
Hi there. So a couple of things on our sofa that we're thinking about. So Selene thought about the chuppah, actually, as perhaps another thing that, it's a box, but open on all sides.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah. And something happens in it. It's that liminal space between statuses, right? Like you change status under the chuppah.
Yeah. And the thing I was thinking about is from the High Holy Day liturgy, which might throw a monkey wrench into the whole thing, but that thing, the one that stands out in the Unatana Tokef, that each of us is a shattered urn. Yes, now that one's really, I don't know, there's something pretty deep there, but it stands out in the list, the cloud passing by, there's all this natural imagery. Right. And then stuck in the middle of it is that each of us is a shattered urn, which maybe if you think about, you were talking about the Kabbalistic thing of God.
The Kabbalistic,
shattered urns, so there's an image of God thing there, maybe.
That's, I'm gonna have to think on that shattered urn. That's really powerful.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So, wow. So so that's kind of what I've been so excited to kind of share this with you and let you brainstorm just as Rabbi was on all the other boxes and vessels and containers that we have, and how Judaism itself is a model for coming out, and and coming out in all different ways. We, of course, within Pride Month and LGBTQ spaces, we might be talking about coming out in terms of gender identity or sexuality, but we come out every day as we become more of who we are meant to be. And maybe that's even this whole idea of teshuvah, of returning to our essence of who we essentially are, and getting back to that, but then allowing ourselves to grow and change. And I mean, do you think that we are do you think we have a core essence that kind of stays the same? It's a yes, and we grow and change, and but that coming out process. And I don't know if you've all felt this in different ways, but at points of our life when you feel like you're coming out by declaring, what you want to do for your job, or you're coming out because you're declaring how you want your family to be, or you're coming out in little ways and big ways. But it's in the revealing. I think it's when we reveal, or when we figure something out, that we can share with the world. I think to me, this is what Joy's talking about, in that it's in that coming out, in that being vulnerable. It's in that being vulnerable where we find God, or where we can sense God. And that being made in God's image means that we have the capability of spilling over and being fluid and being incomprehensible and not making sense always, and not being neat and tucked in and easily understood, right?
Yeah. Andy?
Well, I think that the antithesis of this is the culture that labels everything. And I thought of that word when you started with the boxes, that we fight this. Well, I do. There's always a label for something, or for how someone is, or what and I think it's so pervasive that it's really working against us. You have to really come up to that word and that way of thinking of everyone to, it's just, I think once you start realizing it, you see that we are just constantly labeling.
Right. I think you're right. And it is limiting. And to some extent, we use, especially with diagnoses, right? Like ADHD and ASD and different categories we have for people. I mean, you're so right. Everything is a label. You dress casual, you dress prepper, we put labels on every single thing and I think because it's easy for humans, we need categories, we need something to be able to explain it in an easy way. And so if you say like, oh, I have ADHD, at least it gives you a reference. It gives you something, an understanding of what you may be talking about or dealing with. And so that's helpful in some ways. Of course, it's helpful to have a label that then helps you understand the person, but it can be so limiting as well.
Do you do? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. What do we do about that?
Yeah, well, no, there's this question that you meet someone, what do you do? I mean, what kind of a
right. Well, what do you
question
do?
is
Right.
That, what do you, it's just, I don't like that question.
Right. What do you do? How do you spend your time?
I don't know. Sometimes
Right. How do you spend your time?
Sometimes I do that. And I had a friend who once said at a dinner table early in her, she was very young, and she said, well, sometimes I wash the windows, and she was at this business dinner, and she said,
Yeah, right. And the point of these questions is to categorize the person further, probably like, she's and we need to make sense. And then I think what Joy is saying is that she felt like she didn't make sense in these categories, in any of the categories. She didn't make sense, in terms of gender, in terms of, interest or whatever. And so when you're a person that doesn't fit neatly in these categories and you look to God, and God, of course, doesn't fit neatly into any category, then you feel the parts of me that don't fit into these categories is the parts of me like God. And that when I heard and when I heard that, it just blew up my idea of being made in God's image completely. And it challenged me to be more open or vulnerable and to live how you honestly, naturally, your natural voice and who you need to manifest in the world. And it is scary, and it takes incredible bravery to do that, I think, in whatever ways. Do you feel that? Do you feel like we play roles and we don't even always know consciously like how stymied we are in some ways?
For sure, but I think that is part of the aging process. And if you are on that path and you get to a certain point and you're still saying, well, I don't do that well, or I can't do, or this or that. And I think, you take a step back on that, because it's time to be able to say, it comes earlier for some people, but, when I hear it among my peers, I just think, not good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who cares? Who cares?
I couldn't wear that. I couldn't try that. I couldn't. Yeah. And I think we have icons now, cultural icons that are blowing that up as well. And that's extremely helpful, I think.
Yeah, right, right. It's definitely better, but in the microcosm, it's not always playing out.
Right. Because we are a judging, discerning people,
And, that's exactly what I was going to say, that, if I look back and think of how my attitudes have changed, and really, the first gay person I met was in college, and, transgender, besides Renee Richards, we didn't think about that. And now it's a whole new world. And sometimes pronouns are hard for me. And when I go up to camp, there's a lot of non-binary kids, and I just have to keep reminding myself. And so the framework you've given us, I think really opens it up, especially for their kids to think out of the box and be overspilling that there's no right answer and all of that.
Right. And there's this like popular t-shirt that's now been made, God is transgender. And Rabbi Ike was ahead of the curve on this and preached on this a while ago, that God is beyond gender for sure, fluid, both and none, neither, everything. Right. And of course, it's an anthropomorphic way to look at God. God is not, but this is how humans look at God continuously. But I think very affirming and very powerful for someone who is defying boxes as God does. God spills over, God cannot be contained in box. And so when humans are willing to not be contained in a box, wow. And I do see, a generation of especially young people who are going to push the limit on every creative aspect of humanity. And we are going to just see a varied, human expression. And maybe that will bring us, closer to glimpses of God.
I also think that, what's hard for us or hard, my parents' generation, they're trying to talk about pronouns, and my dad said to me once, well, what pronoun should I use? I said, you don't, assume anything, and they speak English and you need to have a dialogue. And but with our kids, it's just they don't see anything.
And you can of course always ask someone, what are your pronouns? And it should be a very, very normative, respectful question that you can ask absolutely anyone. What are your pronouns? My pronouns are she, her. What are yours? And it's a very respectful, great way to just ask someone how they go through the world, how they want to be seen. And I think it is true that it can be confusing because of our categories and boxes. And you'll see someone who says, I use he, him pronouns, and this person is wearing pearls and has makeup. And you're like, well, I don't get it, right? Like, if you're going to use he, him, and you want to go through life as a guy and you want to be seen as a guy, you're blurring right? And so this is where we have to, this is about our sense, our construct of man, masculine, and someone's internal sense of how they're, of who they are and how they go through the world. And I think it's a felt thing. We all have it. How I sometimes imagine, if I went through the world, I went to a restaurant, I started going through and everyone said, oh, excuse me, sir, or, sorry, sir. And I was like, it would just feel jarring right? Because you fundamentally are how you need to be. It's not a matter of how feminine you dress or where you see yourself on the feminine. It's a matter of who you fundamentally need to be in the world and how you need people to see you. And so I do think about that. And when someone tells you what their pronouns are, it's how they're telling you how they need to function and how they need to be seen. And how powerful that is for all of us to be able to say that and be able to affirm that. So last minute ideas or questions. I can share with you that, so in our religious school, we spent the whole year on these, the kids in art spent the year on these 5 images. And let me see if I can pull up for you real fast. We tried this thing this year, which, let's see if I can get some of them here for you, which sort of worked. Do I have any of them here? Oh yeah, here's one of them. Let me share my screen. so what our art teacher did is every kid made one piece. And then so these are enormous. They're 10 foot by 7 foot in real life. And there's 5 of them. And so everyone individually did their thing. No kid will know which one was theirs, but, and then he's photographed them. So for this book that I've got to finish up, the illustrations are these pictures that were kind of communal in that way. And I've even thought about writing pieces communally. Like partially I would like to have, 20 authors on this book because so many people have helped me with it. And just the idea of communal work and like sharing the project. And even as I was writing it, like there were times where I was like, would you like to write it? I'd like to pass it off to someone else. Here's the idea. Now and just sharing in a project together. Like I wish that all of you could spend 5 minutes and just, write down what's coming to your mind and share it in. And then somehow it's like in there. So maybe it's not, I don't know. I keep thinking about maybe it's not an Amazon book. Maybe it's like a Google Doc that lives, or it's I don't know. Vanessa, you're so creative. Maybe you have an idea, but it's like, I feel like it's a shared thing.
Right. I think this is so powerful. And, in 10 years, there'll be a technology to do exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
And certainly asking me, I mean, I'm good, but I'm, the next generation is going to be fabulous. And I will talk to you offline about all of this because I would really be excited to bring this to camp where the kids are thinking about it intentionally and,
spilling over, being messy.
Yeah.
Don't color in the line. This is not the coloring in the lines. This is
Right.
not the paint by number. This is like,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. What does a paint by number look like when there's no numbers and there's no paint, the colors, and there's
right. I had an art teacher who couldn't stand when the teachers put bulletin boards like an outline. She goes, let it spill over. It doesn't have to stay in the box on the bulletin board.
Right. That's another part, right? The neat border. And there's something to be said for beauty comes in, order and containment. Containment is not bad. That's where I'm playing with that juxtaposition of that. Like what should be contained, what can be contained, and then when,
you need an etrog box, you need a tzedakah box,
right? Because you can't have money just scattered on your shelf, right?
Right.
Yeah, but you also have to think of it as in order for us to grow, right? We have to spill over. So if we keep ourselves in this neat little place, right, we're not going to grow because we have to leave our comfort zone. We have to eventually kind of leave that place and leave that structure so that we can grow as people.
That speaks to me because it's messy and it's hard and it is painful at times, and we just had an, episode of an unsuccessful little 1-week camp. And, it is frustrating and painful and like, but you're right. It's in those, you have to, it is messy, but then you grow, hopefully, through it. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the things that are the messy, overflowing things are the parts of us like our imagination, our creativity.
Yes.
And those things should be allowed to spill and be whatever they want to be. And you just, there's things that you need to have those boxes for sure. You don't want to live in a house that's a disaster area.
Right.
When it comes time to, being a creative and creating something that's from yourself out.
Right. It's the jumping in the puddle and the ripple, Yeah. Well, beautiful.
Yeah. Would you not say our body contains our soul?
Oh, yes. Who just said that?
And
Yes, the body. I mean, of course, the body. I mean, we are a vessel. We are a holy vessel.
Yeah.
What are we a holy vessel for? Right. It's not it's right. It's energy. It's electricity. It's whatever word you, soul, heart, spirit, humor.
it's contained.
It's contained and then it's not contained.
And then you can't have freedom if you don't have discipline. So
Right.
we.
Right. The vessels are good and necessary and holy as well. Right. Well, this was so fun to
Yeah, really, Yasher Koach, Rabbi Ari, and you've given us a lot to think about this evening. And you know, I'm going to bring some of this in. You're getting some good messages, and we'll see everybody. You know, Torah study Friday night, whatever it is. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. And thank you, everybody.
thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
so
Thank
much,
Thank you,
Ari.
Ari.
Thank
That was
you.
Bye.
wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you.
It was really wonderful. I
Good
learned a
night.
lot.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.